And let's say this guy is from development team 1, this guy is from development team 2, and this guy is from finance. Now, obviously, the guy from finance has nothing to do with the job that is concerning the application itself. So I really would not want the finance guy to have access to my job one. So that's the very first criteria. I want to be able to create the user accounts, and then I want to be able to limit people to the jobs that they're concerned with. So if this is the, let's say this is called application one, then I only want the dev one to have access to this job. If I have something called as application two, assuming this is the team that takes care of application two, then I only want this guy to have access to application two. I would not want my finance to be able to access application two, or I would not want my developer one to have access to application too. So that's how user access works in general. And if I created some sort of reporting or some sort of dashboard for the money that we're spending every month, in that case, I might want my finance guy to have access to reporting, but I would not want my developers to have access to reporting because it doesn't really concern them. So that's the basic idea of how you would want authorization or access control to work in general. Now we'll see how we can actually do that with Jenkins. So if I go back to my server, the first option I have is anyone can do anything. So obviously if I select that option, anybody can basically look at my Jenkins, view the Jenkins, modify the jobs, run the jobs, delete the jobs, add more users. So anybody can do anything, as the name explains. The second option, legacy mode, we'll not really talk about that right now. The second option that I have is logged in users can do anything, which basically means as long as the user has login credentials, he will have the administrative rights as long as he's logged in. Now, this is useful when you have about, like 2 or 3 people in your DevOps team, and those are the only people that's going to have access to Jenkins. So this is useful in case there's only like 2 or 3 of you that's going to be working on Jenkins. But if you have a team of, let's say, 100 people, and you're going to end up creating access for 10 people out of 100, in that case, it's not really useful because if somebody screws up something, you don't really know you don't really know who made the changes or who caused an error or why the job failed. So there is no accountability in case of 10 people. But if you're only working with 2 or 3 guys, then this is the option that I'll go with. But if you have multiple folks in your team, in that case we'll look at matrix based security. So matrix based security is where you can define a username and you can define the access the user would have. So what I mean by that is I'll actually get my Jenkins URL and we'll open it in Firefox so that I'm not logged in as admin, right? Uh, okay, open this, right. So right now, there is no option to sign up actually. So let's say I allow an option to sign up. Where is the option? There is an option to allow the sign up on the main page somewhere here. Where do you see that? Hmm. Anybody can do anything. Third row from above. It was inside. Yeah, I really forgot where the option was. Like it's been a while since I've done all of these things in Jenkins. But I know for a fact that there is an option to allow sign up of the users somewhere in here. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm completely blind. I apologize. I could not see this option. So there is an option that says allow users to sign up. So I'll check this box and I'll click on save. For now, I'll only select anyone can do anything and I'll allow the users to be able to sign up. So I'll click on save and we'll go back to my Jenkins in Firefox and we'll sign up for ourselves. So I'll refresh the page. Now you see I have a link that says click here to create an account. So I'll create an account for myself. I'll say my name is Nishant. I'm sorry, my username is Nishant. My name is Nishant Soni. Email address is, it doesn't really matter what the email address is. And this is my password. So I'll only use password as my password. And I'll say create the account for me. Now, if I log in as Nishant, you see I'm logged in as Nishant Soni, right? But you would also notice I'll have full access to Jenkins. Everything that I can do as an administrative user, I'm also able to do that as Nishant. So that kind of kills the idea of authentication in the first place, doesn't it? So it'll work if you have a couple of people, if there's only two or three of you, but if you have tens or 50 people working on Jenkins, then this is not the ideal state you would want to be in. So in that case, I'll go back to my administrative user and I'll click on global security. And now I'll select matrix based security and I'll click on add user or group. Now this is where I can add a user and define the overall permissions the user would have. So in my case, the user is called Nishant. So I'll say Nishant, and this is where I can define the role or the privileges Nishant would have in general. So let's say if I want Nishant to have only, let's say I want Nishant to have read-only access, right? In that case, I can say Nishant can read the job. Nishant can discover the job. Discover would basically mean search for the job. So Nishant can search for the job and Nishant can read the job. Let's say these are the only options I want to provide to this particular user. At the same time, the admin is the administrative user. So I'll add that and I'll click on save. Now, if I go back to my Firefox, where I'm logged in as Nishant Soni, and if I refresh the page, okay, so it says access denied. Nishant is missing overall permissions. So you have to assign overall read permissions to Nishant. So we'll go to global security and we'll assign overall read permissions to Nishant. Now we'll save this. We'll go back to my Firefox and we'll refresh the page. Now if you notice, I'm not sure if you can read this, but if you notice, I'm logged into the main page of Jenkins, but a lot of options have disappeared. Like I don't have the link to manage Jenkins anymore. I don't have the link to create a job anymore. Like we have a new item at the top. I don't have that option anymore. And if I click on my job, the only thing I can do is I can view the logs of each and every job. I can't really build the job. I can't configure the job. I can't delete the job. I can't create a new job. So basically that's what happens. So let's say if you're running a job for your development team, then you'll create a read-only account for them so that they can basically read the logs and ensure that everything is working as intended. So they don't really have administrative access. At the same time, they have enough of access to view the logs of the job. So that's the very basic idea. Cool. I hope we're clear about this so far. Now that's how you'd work with authentication or access control in Jenkins. The next thing we want to look at is called plugins. So if you remember, yesterday I'd said everything in Jenkins is plugins. Jenkins out of the box, there is not much Jenkins can do unless you get the plugin for everything that you need. So if you go to manage Jenkins and if you click on plugins, this is where you can work with plugins. So there are 4 tabs in total. The first tab says updates. So obviously, as the name suggests, you can, okay, we'll start with available. So as the name suggests, you can click on available, which will show you all the plugins that Jenkins has. Now, if you look at my scroll bar, you can obviously tell there are hundreds of plugins, right? So this is where you can come and look at all the possible plugins that you have and probably search for the plugin that you would want. So for example, if you're working with Git, you can search for Git. Now I have multiple plugins about Git, right? I have GitHub authentication, GitLab authentication, GitHub issues, pipeline, GitHub notify. So everything that has to do with Git will show up if you filter Git. Let's say if I wanted to do something with Docker, I can search for a plugin for Docker and it says start Windows container, yet another Docker. So everything basically. So you can click on available and look at the plugins that are available in Jenkins. The next tab is you can click on installed, which will basically list the plugins that are installed in your Jenkins right now. So if you remember yesterday, there was an option that says install suggested plugins, which is the reason why a lot of plugins are installed by default. So these all are the plugins that are installed already in my Jenkins. Now, if you look at the first tab that says updates, this tab will basically list the plugins that are installed, but they have an update available. So if you have 10 plugins installed and two of them are outdated, in that case, you'll see them here, and it will basically give you an option to update the plugins that you installed. And the fourth option is advanced. So if you have an in-house Jenkins development team that works on or that develops Jenkins plugins, in that case, you can basically come here and install the plugin that your team has developed, on their own. It's not really a public plugin, but if you end up creating a plugin for your company, in that case, you can come here and upload or install the plugin that you have. So basically, that's how plugins would work. We would need to install quite a few plugins. You know what? Might as well just install one right now so that we see how it works. Just before we do, I have a couple of questions here. Renee says, I increased the memory to 7.5 gigabytes. I still get the same error. So Renee, I don't really think that has anything to do with Jenkins. It's probably something else that's causing the error. Now, I can help you look at it after the session, but not really right now because obviously I'm just working on it right in front of you. So that's an error that has nothing to do with Jenkins. It's probably something to do with Linux, in general. So we'll probably look at it after the session. Okay. Another question from Konika is, what if there are 100 developers in an organization? What should be the effective way to provide them the permissions? So Konika, as I said, you would not be creating an account for each developer separately. In most of the cases, with all the companies that I work with, so one of the companies that I work with is called TCS. So there is a TCS campus in Chennai, and there are almost 10,000 people that work out of TCS Chennai every day. Now, when we started implementing DevOps in general in TCS Chennai, we only created three accounts in general. So the first account was an administrative account that was managed by me and three more folks in the DevOps team. So all of us shared the administrative account. The second account only had read-only access that was allocated to the team managers of developers. So I don't really care if that guy shares the user password with the rest of the team, but for them, the only thing that I'm concerned about is that they only have read-only access because obviously they don't need to configure the job. They don't need to build the job. Probably they might want to look at the logs once in a while, in case something fails. So I just gave them read-only access. And the third account was a read-only access to AWS reports. So when I say AWS reports, it was actually finance reports like, you spent $10,000 on this server this month. So there were reports being generated at the end of the month. And then I created another read-only account and allowed or allocated that to the finance team. So it doesn't matter if you have 100 developers or 1,000 developers. In most cases, you would not have more than 3 or 4 accounts in Jenkins because your entire infrastructure would depend on Jenkins. So you really want to tightly control who has access to Jenkins and who can do what in your Jenkins installation, right? I hope that answers your question. So we were talking about plugins, right? So let's go back to plugins. Where is it? Manage plugins. Now there is a plugin that I'm a fan of. Now, obviously, let's say I obviously want to be able to log everything, right? So when somebody runs a job, when a job is run, I want that to be logged. So if I'm not in the office or if I'm not available, I want to be able to look at the logs some other time and kind of get an idea of what exactly was done. So there is a plugin for that. It's called Audit Trail. Now I'll click on available to list all the plugins that are available in Jenkins, and I'll search for Audit Trail. Now you see this plugin called Audit Trail. Now if I wanted to install this plugin, I'll click on, I'll check the box and I'll click on install without restart. So we'll click on that, and that's basically, what the plugin installation page looks like. So we'll wait for it to be done. It's installing the plugin right now. Okay, so it says success, which basically means the plugin was installed. Now let's go back to the home page, click on Manage Jenkins, and let's click on Configure System. If it opens, right, so in Configure Systems, you see I have this option called Audit Trail. This would not have been there before. It's there right now because I installed the plugin. If I did not, then you would not have this option at all. So I have this option now because the plugin is installed, and now I have an option to actually create a logging mechanism. So I can click on Add Logger and let's say log file because I want Jenkins to create a log file. Now it gives me three options: log location, log file size, and log file count. Now you can obviously click on the question mark to read everything about each and every one of them, but I know what exactly are the logs, right? So I can basically, the first option is log location. So where do you want your logs to be stored? So let's just say I'll say temp and Jenkins, no, let's just call it Jenkins audit dot log. So that's where I want my logs to be stored. The second option is the size of the log file. So this is the size. Let's say if I say 25, in this case, my log file will only go as much as 25 megabytes. The moment it reaches 25 megabytes, it will archive those logs and it will create an entirely new log file. And the third option that I have is how many archives do you want to retain? So let's say I want to retain 5 log files. So what it looks like is, if I get a pen, so let's say this is my very first log file. So Jenkins will keep filling the logs as and when the jobs are run. The moment this file reaches 25 megabytes, it will archive the file, it will be archived, and it will create a new file. It will start filling that file. The moment the second file reaches 25 megabytes, it will archive that file and push this file as the second archive. This file will be the first archive, and it will create a new log file. So basically, there's a retention policy of 5 archives, and the total size of the log file can only be as much as 25 megabytes. Now, obviously, you can edit this number and uh, enter the desired number that you have, but that's what basically I have the options of. So you can work out the details that you want, but that's what I want right now. So let's save it, let's run a job, and let's see if we actually get some sort of logs, right? So let's click on build now. Yeah, so we have the fifth run. Now if I go back to the server, and if I go to my temp directory, I have this file called Jenkins audit.log.0. I hope all of us can read that. So if I cat the file, if I say cat Jenkins audit.log.0, you see the logs that say May 30th. This is the timestamp. The job was started by admin user, started by admin on node Jenkins, started at so and so time, and the job completed in 32 milliseconds, and the exit code was success. So basically, no matter how many jobs I run now, I would always have a log trail that I can, look at. If I'm not in the office, somebody ran 10 jobs that I'm not aware of, I can come back and look at the logs and basically get the idea of who did what. I hope this was clear. So we got this to working because there is a plugin called Audit Trail available. So similarly, doesn't matter what you're trying to do, you would always find some plugin that would help you achieve the end goal that you have. Cool. Any questions on Jenkins so far, guys? Yeah, so I have one question, actually multiple questions from Nadeem. Nadeem says, what if the log size does not reach 25 megabytes? Which format will be saved in? If it exceeds 25 megabytes, where the archived file would be saved? Good questions, Nadeem. So if I do an ls here, you can see it's called Jenkins audit.log.0, right? Now I can also do Where's the file? So Jenkins audit.log.0. So current size of the file is 208 kilobytes. The moment this file reaches 25 megabytes, it will be archived as Jenkins audit.log.1, and then a new log.0 file will be created, which will like start storing the logs. The moment the second file reaches 25 MB, the log.1 will be pushed to log.2, and log.0 will be pushed to log.1, and a new file will be created. So basically, it will keep pushing the files, and it will only retain as much as 5 files. So in this case, this is not time bound. It's not about how far back you would have the logs of. It's more about the size of the logs. So in this case, I'm only saying store the logs until the moment they reach 25 megabytes and then archive them, and only archive 5 log files. Anything more than that would be trashed and would be removed completely. I hope that answers your question. Cool. Any other questions so far? Okay, so Nadeem says, where can we find the Jenkins database inside Wordlib Jenkins? Nadeem, that's a good question, but I would probably answer that probably one-to-one after the session, because I don't really want others to be confused about the database. Right now, the point is to learn Jenkins and not the database part. But if you are interested, or if you have some sort of database administration background, I'll probably give you the location off the record. Rakesh says, so you mean log.5 is final? Yes, Rakesh. So essentially what happens is currently I have log.0, right? Now the moment this file reaches 25 megabytes, it will be archived as log.1, and there would be a new log.0 that will be created. Now the moment this new log.0 reaches 25 megabytes, this log.1 will be pushed to log.2, and this log.0 will be pushed to log.1, and a new log.0 will be created. That's the idea. Max logging. What is the max size of the log that we can add? Venkata's question. Venkata, there's really no limit about the size of the log files. I've seen Jenkins logs were terabytes. Now, trust me when I say this, there are companies which are completely dependent on Jenkins. If the Jenkins were not reachable for one day, the entire company would fall. So I've seen Jenkins logs were terabytes, like literally 1500 gigabytes, 1700 gigabytes worth of logs of Jenkins. So there is really no limit as to what you can set. It's completely up to you. Manjunath says, yes, in a company, how many DevOps admin can be there? So Manjunath, that's really a subjective question, isn't it? Now, if a company is really matured, now I'll give you. I think I said it a couple of days ago, didn't I? So if you talk about Netflix, Netflix is a really big company. Netflix has more than a million users, but Netflix only has 20 DevOps. So 20 people serving the infrastructure of a million customers. So again, it really depends from company to company. It depends on the maturity in terms of technicality of the company. So in some companies which are trying to get to certain state of DevOps, they might employ 10 people because they want ideas, they want things to be done faster. But once the things are actually done, they might just cut it down to 2 or 3 people, right? Rakesh says later on, no more. Okay, cool. Manjunath says, in bigger organization, for sure we'll have multiple admins, and how can we control the access between them? So Manjunath, this is assuming you are part of the administrative team. So in that case, you would basically be sharing the administrative rights with all of them. So you can't really control, as simple as this, right? So if you have 5 people in your DevOps team, you can't really say that I would not give access to you, right? So you would actually be sharing the administrative details across your team with the people that has the same rights as you. Um, Rakesh says, so at any point in time, the max logs allowed is 5. No, Rakesh. If I go back to manage Jenkins and if I click on configure systems, you see I said 5 here myself, right? What's stopping me from changing this 5 to 10? If I say 10, then it will retain 10 log files. So it's completely up to you, right? So if I save it, it will retain 10 files. Simple as that. Nadeem says, can you please open up the logs so that we can see what exactly is stored in the log file? Okay, I will, Nadeem. Jyoti says, can we keep backup of these log files to make size file count available the next day of the job result? Now, Jyoti, that is more about the log aggregation. That has nothing to do with Jenkins. That question. So yesterday I kind of explain the things that I do as a DevOps guy, right? So there is infrastructure automation, there is application lifecycle, there is log management. So your question is about log management. Now, this question will always come up when you actually get to the senior level of DevOps. The point is, if you have 100 servers running, how do you gather the logs from the 100 servers? Where do you send the logs? How do you visualize the logs? So that's a completely different question. Now there is something called as ELK. So E stands for Elasticsearch, K stands for Kibana, and L stands for Logstash. Your question is, can we keep a backup of these log files so that we can view them later? You obviously can, but if you wanted to actually track the logs, in the future, you would want to learn what ELK is. So, that's on your own. Cool. The next question is there any other plugin apart from Audit Trail which can do the same job? Now, as I said, there are literally hundreds of plugins. Not one person would know all the plugins. Hell, even I don't remember all the plugins that I've used in the past. So you can probably come here, just search for logs and see what you get. So backlog, this plugin integrates Jenkins to backlog. Just look at the plugins that you have and find out the one that suits your requirement the best. So as I said, right, there are literally hundreds of plugins for everything, and you cannot expect one person to remember all the plugins. But the point is, with time, you would be familiar with most of the plugins that are important for the production environment. Rakesh says, how to define and decide the log file size and the count. Are there any default values you can go? Rakesh, I'm not really sure what part of this is you are not really understanding. If I go to configure systems, your question is how to define or decide the log file size and the count. This is where I'm defining the log size, isn't it? I'm saying 25 megabytes. I can also say 100 megabytes. And you're saying how to define the file count. This is where I'm defining the file count. I don't really think this is that difficult to understand, right? This is where you can define or design what or how you want to store your logs. Cool? Cool. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that was really the introduction to plugins. Like basically, I just installed a plugin called Audit Trail. You would literally find plugin for everything under the sun you can think of in Jenkins. Now let's go back to manage Jenkins. Now we looked at what did we look at? We looked at configure global security. Now obviously the rest of the links, they are all about managing your Jenkins instance yourself. So if I click on configure systems, we might as well go over the options that you have. I'll simply show you the ones that are important. So this is where we define the audit trail plugin. Now below audit trail, what I have is the timestamper. So timestamper is what basically signs or certifies a job. Let me open a new tab. Now this job, it says this was run at 3:44 p.m., right? That's a timestamp. So depending on how you want your timestamp to look like, you can modify this. Currently, it's set to hour, minute, and seconds format. If you want the minute to show up first, you can modify it to minute, hour, and seconds. Basically, that's the format of each and every timestamp in your Jenkins. The next option is the Jenkins location. For now, it's only located to my IP address. Currently, it's located to my public IP address, and the port is 8080. In your case, if you actually end up having a domain name for Jenkins, in that case, you can update this IP address to the actual domain name. Then system admin email address. For now, I don't really have one here, but if you want to set up some sort of email notification in case there is something wrong with Jenkins, that is what you will define here. That's the administrative address of your Jenkins. Then I have, what else do I have? Let's see. Yeah, here's the Git plugin. So for Git plugin, if you remember, we've done user like Git global config user.name and Git global config user.email. So if you're doing something with Git from Jenkins, you can basically set your user.name here and user.email here. So that's what Jenkins would use if it's doing something with Git. We'll obviously do a lot of things with Git, but this is where you'll set it. Now here comes the SMTP server. So yesterday I said there are a lot of options where you can send email notification in case a job was complete. You can send an email notification if a job failed, or a lot of things where you can send email notification. But when I say you're sending out an email, you obviously need some sort of SMTP server that is used by Jenkins, right? How would Jenkins send out an email? That's what you define here. Now, if any one of you has ever set up your emails in your phone, except your Gmail, not your Gmail account, any other email account, if you ever saved in your phone, you would know there is something called as an SMTP server. Now, in case of Google, the SMTP server is called smtp.gmail.com. Now, all of these details will be provided to you by your IT administrator. Now, that's the guy that's managing the email for your company. So if you are the one who's managing the email, then obviously you would already know the details. But if you don't, then you'll get it from the person who's managing the email accounts for your company. So as an example, in this case, email suffix might be, we can leave it blank. SMTP authentication, the username is nishan.sony88@gmail.com. This is my password. Use SSL, SMTP port would always be 465. Reply to list, I can basically say reply to list. Now these are standard email stuff. So if you ever configured an email account, you would know what all of these mean. Now, even though I'm adding my details, I don't really think this will work, because if you log in from like some other location to your Gmail account, Gmail would probably block it, and it will send you an email saying somebody else tried to access your account, something along those lines. So this server it's not my computer, right? It's somewhere in a data center, which is why I don't really think this would work. But if you had an email account which will allow Jenkins to access the email account, this is where you set up the notifications for the emails that would be sent out at some point in time. Then comes the default subject, the default content of the email. Now there's something called as global variables in Jenkins. What I mean by global variables, if you notice, this is called a $ project underscore name, $build underscore number, $build underscore status. So this would actually be replaced by your actual job name. For example, if I was to set up email notification for my job, this particular job that I've created, when the notifications are sent out, the project name will be replaced by my job, because that's the project name. The build number will be replaced by this actual build number. So in case I'm sending out a notification at the end of the 5th build, it will say the build number will be replaced by 5. If it's sent out the next time, the build number will be replaced by 6. And the build status, build status is the exit code. So when I say exit code, this is your build status. So in this case, this is success. In case of a failure, it will say, the job failed. That's the default email pattern that you have. Cool. So that's all you really had into configure systems. Now there's something called as global tool configuration. So this is where you can basically install the plugins that Jenkins would end up using. For example, if you were working with a Java application, for example, yeah, I don't really want to get into that right now. But let's say if you require Jenkins to have Java installed, in that case you can click on Add JDK and install Java. If you want, oops, let's delete this. If you want Jenkins to have Git installed, this is where you can install Git. If you want Jenkins to have Gradle, Ant, Maven, Docker, You can basically install any of those tools from this page. Cool. Let's go back to manage Jenkins. What else do you have? Then you have plugins. We looked at plugins. Then you have nodes. Now we'll look at nodes towards the at a later point in time once we have the basics of Jenkins in place. Yeah, that's really all you really had to understand about Jenkins, the manage Jenkins page for now. Cool. We'll go back to the home page. Now we'll actually start creating the jobs. We'll start creating a few more simple jobs, and then eventually we'll move on to the pipelines, and we'll look at what the pipeline looks like and how do you create and manage the pipelines for your company. A couple of quick questions. Salvatore says, would you recommend Jenkins for continuous delivery deployment, or there are better tools you would use? No, Salvatore, I would highly recommend Jenkins. Now, there is a difference. When you say, would you recommend Jenkins for continuous delivery and deployment? Yes, I would, but it completely depends on how you are deploying the application itself. For example, as I said, Jenkins is a personal assistant, right? So if you have an application that you're building using Docker, then you would require something like Kubernetes to actually deploy Docker. Now the point is, Jenkins is basically going to work with Docker and Kubernetes to make sure there is continuous delivery and continuous deployment. So the question should be, would you trust Docker and Kubernetes, or would you use something else? Jenkins would always be there no matter what architecture you end up using. Nadeem says, where can we see the list of global variables already set up in Jenkins? Can admin set up custom variables? Yeah. So Nadeem, to answer your question, global variables, all it takes is a Google search, doesn't it? There's also a link within the Jenkins, I think, somewhere. You'll find the global variable. I really forgot where the link is. Manage Jenkins. Just give me 1 second. Configure system. Yeah, there is some link in Jenkins which will show you all the global variables, but just give me one moment. But there is a huge list. There are like 15 or 20 variables that you can, yeah, this is where it is. env_vars.html. So if I go back to my Jenkins and if I go to env_vars.html, here are the global variables. Now, in this case, I manually typed the URL, but I'm pretty sure there's a link somewhere within the Jenkins that'll take you to this page.